Let's look at our next characteristic, variability, meaning services are heterogeneous in that they are changeable. Every time you encounter a service, it's likely to be different. So services, therefore, are difficult to standardize. What exactly is it that makes it so variable and challenging to standardize for service marketers? Well, as we've just discussed, inseparability means that customers and service providers have to interact with each other. The nature of that free-flowing interaction means that there are a lot of factors which are outside the control of the service provider. Say, for example, your normally cheerful hairdresser is in a bad mood. How might this affect your service experience? What if, to get over a bad mood, you're looking to have a complete image makeover? So the stakes are set higher for your haircut, and if your hairdresser is in a bad mood, that might have a doubly negative impact if the result isn't what you hoped for. So how might this affect your overall service experience? And that's certainly likely to be different to the next time you go for a haircut. Other customers can also affect our service experience. You see on the slide an airport, a busy airport departure lounge. Here the presence of other customer groups could negatively impact on the quality of our service experience. However, completely contrary to that, in other situations, you might actually want other customers to be there. Imagine going to a nightclub. We've all been there when you turn up at a nightclub and there's only about 5 other people there. That's going to negatively impact your service experience, and it's something that is directly in that moment out with the control of the business. The important point to make is that heterogeneity of services make them very difficult to manage. In many cases, this changeability and variability is difficult to predict and plan for, and can have significant impacts on the success and the sustainability of a business. In many cases, organizations focus on operating systems and standard procedures, and in particular they focus on staff training to try to ensure some level of consistency in service delivery. If you've got a job, you may have had training in service procedures. In addition, many companies count on problems happening, but make sure that they can put the matter right quickly. Therefore, they offer very good customer service and complaints procedures. For instance, in restaurants, this might mean that if a customer complains about a meal, then waiting staff know that they have the ability to automatically offer a refund. And we'll come on to talk about this later in the service recovery section in part 4. So let's look at those characteristics of that main characteristic of variability. It reminds us that standardization is difficult within services. It puts a focus on getting right the process of selection, training, and rewarding staff as they deliver their duties. Often, evaluation systems are helpful, both in evaluating staff performance and service experience by customers. It also requires the use of reliable equipment. Ensuring that you've got the infrastructure of systems and hardware in your service design allows you to mitigate for the variability that is inevitable within service delivery. Finally, we look at perishability, having a brief life. In the picture, you see empty seats. You cannot store the space in a concert hall on one day when it is empty and then use it on another day when there is a sellout concert to make more money. You have to sell the seats on the day that you're running the show, and if you don't sell them, they perish. Unlike a shop, it can store its unsold Christmas stock in January and a January sale, for example, which is something we're all familiar with. So the issue of supply and demand is very important for service managers. In the short term, we can try to meet excess demand by, say, putting on an extra concert when the demand is high. We'll all be familiar with that. Your favorite artist coming to town and so many people are trying to buy tickets that they decide to put on an extra date. But that is difficult to manage in the long term, and that example is something that's difficult for touring artists to do, for example, because the economics of managing a music tour are so complex that adding an extra date is actually very difficult. But one of the key techniques to manage supply and demand is using price. So, for example, High demand services or peak times will cost more than other times, and they may even offer discounts to tempt customers to purchase services at off-peak times. If you travel on the train between Edinburgh and Glasgow between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m, it costs considerably more because that's peak demand time. Many gyms will offer off-peak memberships, giving people a discounted membership price but limiting them to use the club when other customers aren't using the club so frequently. That tempts people who have different timetables to use the facilities and ups the revenue for the business according to different types of service demand. So perishability reminds us that consumption cannot be stored with services. Once the plane's taken off, you can't sell the seats on the plane. You can't sell last night's hotel beds. That encourages marketers to try and stimulate off-peak demand, to try and manage the spread of revenue that they get across the different times of activities that they have on offer. It also encourages marketers to try and establish secondary spend. Secondary spend is, once you've got customers through the door, trying to maximize the amount of money they spend because they're the customers you have. And if you've ever been on a budget airline flight, for example Ryanair, that's an excellent example of marketing in action trying to get you to secondary spend at every opportunity. Trying to get you to secondary spend on taking extra luggage on board, for joining a speedy queue, for buying food and drink, for buying duty free, for buying scratch cards, for booking rental cars, to the extent that actually Ryanair makes more profit off its secondary spend on board than it does through selling plane tickets. Let's summarize the characteristics of services marketing. Intangibility, unable to be touched. Inseparability, simultaneous production and consumption. Variability, difficult to standardize, and constant dynamic interactions between service providers and service consumers. Perishability, unable to be stored, has a short shelf life. You can't sell yesterday's seats on tomorrow's aircraft. And that gives us a nice little acronym to remember, IVIP. Inseparability, variability, intangibility, and perishability, if you like. But something to use as a reminder for exam revision. That concludes part 2. Up next, we'll be looking at the extended marketing mix in part 3.